give him a round of applause. Fighting for our shared progressive values down in Washington, D.C., standing up for expanded economic opportunity for everyone, and lifting people up, not tearing people down. That's the kind of politics we all need right about now. And if he were to get the nomination and win the presidency, he would have a tremendous ally in Washington, D.C., our wonderful friend, a champion of working families and small businesses here in the state of New Hampshire each and every day down in Washington, D.C. Please give it up for Annie McLean Custer.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you everybody for being here, and thank you, Michael, for opening up Gibson's once again to show America how we pick presidents in New Hampshire. This is we've had about a dozen of these, so right here with all different candidates. But this one is very, very special for me because Beto is a very dear friend, and it's rare to have a friend run for President of the United States. It's a great honor. It's a great honor. So we came in the class of, the mighty class of 2012 together, elected to Congress. We had a big class. There were about 50 of us. And Beto was a standout from the get-go. From the very start, he's been a very special guy. And I want to just tell you a quick story because I had a chance to work with him on something that I think is really, really important. We sat together for 6 years on the Veterans Affairs Committee. And when you're sitting next to each other in hearings week after week, you get a lot of time to just quibble, talk in between, and sort of comment on the testimony and talk about what was going on in El Paso, what was going on in New Hampshire, and how to best serve our veterans. And Beto had a really challenging situation down in El Paso. I think it was 74 days when you started to get an appointment for psychological services, for any kind of treatment. They had a tremendous lack in workforce. And he was desperate about this, and he really wanted to make sure that the veterans got support. And so we introduced legislation. He helped to pass legislation to get care to veterans more urgently. But more importantly, he literally rolled up his sleeves and went to work. And week after week, he would report in on his progress. And he was out there recruiting mental health care workers to move to El Paso. And he'd come in and he'd say, we talked to this incredible doctor. I think we're going to get him. I think we can convince him to move to El Paso. And eventually we actually worked together on long distance mental health treatment as well. So he really, really cared. But the punchline to the story is by the time he left Congress, it was down to a 5-day waiting list to get an appointment. Because not only does he care about the things that we care about and care about getting services to the communities that need, but he will actually go the extra mile to get it done. So I'm super excited for you all to meet my friend, Beto O'Rourke. Welcome to Concord.
Thank you. Thank you both, Senator Feltus, Congresswoman Custer, Michael for opening up your bookstore, to each of you for welcoming us, including those of you who were innocently browsing the shelves when we showed up. I don't want to assume too much. Thank you. Thanks for having us out. Very much looking forward to introducing myself to you, and even more so to answering your questions and hearing what's on your mind. And leaving here, I hope, a smarter candidate and a better public servant going forward. This is our second visit to Concord, our second visit to New Hampshire. The first one about 3 weeks ago, visited each of the 12 counties of the state, showing up everywhere for everyone to make sure that we understand what is happening here. I have no prospect of earning your vote, certainly not on the first or second or third or fourth visit, but by the fifth time, if I've listened to you and I've learned from you, then perhaps I can speak to our shared concerns, find the common ground to pursue the common cause of this country. And what Annie just described is our government, our country, at its best, at this very divided, highly polarized, hyper-partisan moment. Every one of the 6 years that we served together in Congress, we were in the minority. But we never allowed that to stop us from moving forward. Not only did we turn around mental health care wait times for veterans in El Paso, which were the worst in the United States of America, not unconnected to a frightening high rate of veteran suicide in America and in El Paso. Care delayed became care deferred, became functionally care denied, and veterans are taking their lives at a rate of 20 a day, and it's a conservative estimate, every single day in this country. So we made it our business and our priority, didn't wait for a majority, didn't even wait for action from Congress to turn that VA around. And Annie's right, we went from 68 full-time mental health care staff to today, we're just under 120. We're no longer worst in the nation. Some days we outperform the national average. We will not be satisfied until we are number one, until we are the best. We feel that our veterans, our military retirees, those who put their lives on the line for this country, and we're very willing to lose them for us, deserve nothing less. When we found out at a meeting just like this, because someone like you stood up and said that veterans who have an other than honorable discharge, and we fear that many of our service members are pushed into OTH status when they no longer serve the needs of our military, when they are inconvenient. The consequence of that by law was that you could not walk into a VA and see a mental health care provider or a therapist or a social worker or anybody. And so we had veterans with an other than honorable discharge taking their lives at twice the rate of the general veterans population. When we brought that back to our committee, working with Annie and our colleagues across the aisle, they had their own ideas about how to solve this. We had ours. We introduced a consensus piece of legislation that ensured that veterans, at a minimum, who have an OTH discharge could go into a VA, be able to see a provider, get an appointment, or perhaps in many cases save their lives. And we made our case to our colleagues on the floor of the House of Representatives, 434 of my colleagues, Republicans and Democrats, and we said, listen, is there a cost to take care of more veterans who are not getting care today? Absolutely. We should bear any price for those who willingly serve this country. Should there be a consequence for your status of discharge and the decisions that you made while you were in uniform? Yes, there should, but that consequence cannot be your life. And by a vote of 435 to 0, that measure passed the House, passed the Senate, signed into law by Donald Trump, a man with whom I agree on almost nothing. But we were able to find enough common ground there to get it done. Similar situation when I sat down next to Annie one day at one of our committee hearings. And I hold a town hall in El Paso, or when I was a member of Congress, every single month, without exception. All comers welcome, no holds barred. So you could come if you love me, and my mom often did. You could come if you were disappointed in the vote I had taken, or wondering where the progress is on something that we had talked about introducing, or you just had an idea that you wanted to share with me. And at one of these town halls, a veteran came forward, and he said, I was prescribed an opioid by the VA, to which I became addicted. They, in their ham-handed way, cut me off, and I say ham-handed not at the local level, but in the central office in Washington, D.C. They cut me off of my prescription without an alternative therapy or prescription, including medical cannabis, which is not able to be prescribed at the VA right now, as long as we have these backward drug laws. So he said, what I'm doing right now, and I'm here to tell you, Beto, and the 300 other people in this room, is I'm buying heroin on the street because it is the one way that I can take care of myself. Now, that guy who served this country is not a criminal justice problem. He's a public health opportunity. He needs some help. He needs to get back on his feet. He needs the care that he has earned and that we would all agree that he deserves. And so Annie, as I'm telling her this story, says, I just formed a bipartisan task force, Republicans and Democrats, who are coming together to address this opioid crisis in my home state of New Hampshire, in yours in Texas, across this country, not allowing our differences of party or geography to stand in the way of the solutions. And just visiting right now with the mayor of Manchester, not too far from where we stand here, learning about the safe stations where any person in this state can go into the Manchester Fire Department, meet one of those amazing first responders, and without shame or fear of being jailed, get the help that they need. Listening to people in Pennsylvania where if you are prescribed an opioid in that state, you are also prescribed naloxone, the overdose medication, so that without fear or shame or judgment, you can get the help that we anticipate you will need at some point. At the local level, at the state level, we're coming up with solutions. We just need that to be reflected at the federal level going forward. But unfortunately, we have someone in office today who exacerbates the divisions based on our differences of race or ethnicity or religion or the number of generations we can count ourselves Americans, or whether we just showed up yesterday, to make us angry, to make us afraid, to keep us apart, to keep us from the work that we should be able to do. Now, whether that work is ensuring that we are there for those veterans who have borne the battle, or ending those wars that we've been in some cases for 28 years in Iraq, 18 years in Afghanistan, making sure that the tens of millions of our fellow Americans who have no hope or prospect of seeing a doctor or getting a prescription of any kind or taking their child to a therapist, not for lack of resources, in the wealthiest, the most powerful country on the face of the planet, but for lack of political will. A country that knows full well that there are more than 1 million young people, we call them dreamers, who know no other country but this one, speak no other language but English, are already contributing far more than they ever take, and yet live in a constant fear of deportation back to a country they have never known, whose language they do not speak. Knowing full well that whether I'm in New Hampshire, as we were the last few days in South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, whether I'm back home in Texas, every community that I have visited is suffering the devastation from climate change now, not tomorrow. 58 inches of rain in Houston, Texas fell from the sky, the landfall record for as long as we have been keeping them in North America. And it was the third 500-year flood in our home state in Southeast Texas. I told that story in North Carolina. They said, we almost have you beat. With Florence and Matthew, we've had 2 500-year floods in just the last 2 years. We should be good for 1,000 years. But we know that we're not. Because the scientists tell us that it's not God, it's not nature, it's humankind through our own emissions and excesses and inaction in the face of the truth and the facts and the real story that has warmed this planet a degree Celsius just since 1980. And it's not just the floods or the fires in Northern California. It's the droughts through which our farmers attempt to persist, to grow the food and fiber that feeds and clothes not just this country, but so much of the rest of the world. The droughts from which our neighbors in Central America are fleeing right now 2,000 miles on foot, or if they're lucky, aboard a train, on top of a train actually, called the Beast or La Bestia, to come here because they have no other choice. They cannot feed themselves. And by the way, además, they are living in the deadliest places on the planet today. If you think 400,000 apprehensions at our border with Mexico is a problem, and it may be a problem for those fleeing for their lives, I don't think it's a problem for us. Wait until some countries in the Western Hemisphere can no longer support human life, because that is the direction that we're headed in. You take any of those challenges, whether it is immigration, whether it is healthcare, whether it is veterans care, whether it is combating climate change before it is too late, we cannot meet them with half measures or with only half the country. No one person, no matter how resourceful or strong or experienced she or he may be, no political party can do this on its own. It's going to take all of us, the entire country, coming together. Only then will we get universal, guaranteed, high-quality health care, which means all of us can see a primary care provider, afford our prescriptions, means that in a state like mine, where the largest provider of mental health care services is the county jail system today, that people will be able to see a mental health care provider as a matter of right. And in Texas, in the midst of a maternal mortality crisis 3 times as deadly for women of color, universal care will mean every woman makes her own decisions about her own body, and has access to the care to ensure that she can. On immigration, not only will we follow our own asylum laws and ensure that those families who have made this deadly journey and show up in this country of asylum seekers and refugees and immigrants can find refuge and safety, not their kids in a cage, not that mom deported back to the very country from which she fled. Not only can we live our values and our own laws that are on the books today that the president is breaking, we can also have a chance to rewrite our country's immigration laws in our own image, the image of our communities of Concord, of El Paso, of the United States of America. Free those dreamers from any fear of deportation by making them U.S. citizens in this, their true home country. And on the challenge of climate change, if we decide to, together, not some of us, not those in big cities, not just one political party, but all of us do our part to free ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels, to ensure that we embrace renewable energy like wind and solar and the jobs that come along with it, allow farmers to do their part, provide them an incentive in the Farm Bill so that they can make a profit, growing cover crops that pull more carbon out of the air, use new technologies like precision tilling that disturb less of the carbon in the soil. If this country, all of us, does its part, we can once again assume our rightful role as the indispensable nation, the one who can convene the other powers of the planet to meet an otherwise intractable problem. Then, just then, maybe over the next 10 years, which is all the time that we have left to us, as a civilization, as a human race, to get this right, we can make sure that we are defined not by our divisions, our fear of one another, the pettiness that dominates our national politics, but our aspirations, our ambitions, the hard work, the creativity, the service, and the sacrifice necessary in order to achieve them. For those reasons, I'm running to serve you as the next President of the United States of America, and I'm grateful to have the chance to be before you today. Thank you for having us out. Looking forward to answering your questions and hearing what's on your mind. Thank you all. Thank you, Donald Government.
Hello, is it former Congressman or you for Beto?
Beto.
Beto. Actually, can I say beat him Beto?
Yes.
Beat him Beto. My name is Peyton Livingston. I'm the co-chair of the Bow Democrats down the street. So you're welcome to come to any of our events. We'll tag you on Twitter. So I'm not going to sugarcoat things, Beto. We're looking at a double-barrel financial crisis here for education. We have $1.5 trillion in student loan debt. 44.7 million people in our country are in debt for student loans. And on a local level, we had Executive Director Andrew Walensky explain the educational funding inequity in New Hampshire, meaning that it's not proportionate. People are not getting the same education in terms of money. Some people are getting a $1,500 education in very rich parts of the state, and in very condensed or rural areas, they're only getting them. And you can talk to Senator Feltes, he knows what I'm talking about. Anyway, may you, as passionately as you do, explain to us what your platform is on education funding nationally and how you can help states as President of the United States. Thank you, by the way. And you should definitely kiss that baby at some point.
Thank you. If that's okay with you, I will at some point. So, since we're in a bookstore, I'll begin my answer with this anecdote. The reason that we named our firstborn Ulysses is because we did not have the guts to name him Odysseus. Reading the Odyssey in school, cover to cover, and having a world-class public school teacher help to interpret the stories, hear our feedback, facilitate a conversation in that classroom, changed my life forever. But to learn now that at El Paso High School, they're reading the abridged version of the Odyssey because they have to keep so many days set aside for standardized test prep, for high-stakes, high-pressure tests that in no way effectively measure that child's potential or that teacher's performance is, as they say in academia, screwed up. When you compound that by the fact that public school educators, the cafeteria workers, the custodians, the school bus drivers, the counselors, the librarians, the therapists, the assistant principals, the instructors in the classroom. Far too many of them are working a second or a third job right now just to make ends meet. When you and I would agree that they have the most important job in front of them, if they can unlock that child's lifelong love of learning, there's nothing that's going to beat her. There's nothing that's going to stop us as a country. I want to make sure that we spare no expense or resource to give that teacher, that educator, everything that they need to do that. And you look at the example that they set for us right now, these heroic efforts that they make on the part of kids who may have free and reduced breakfast and lunch but don't have a meal to go home to. Kids who can't see a therapist because their parents aren't enrolled in CHIP or Medicaid or don't qualify or come from mixed immigration status. Families who are homeless and do not know where they're going to rest their head that next night. Whatever their situation, they come into that classroom, that teacher makes them feel like they're in the right place. Very often, out of her own pocket, she's paying for the decorations, the school supplies, that meal that might be missing, that set of clothes because the kid's shown up in the same jeans and t-shirt every single day of the week. Y además, that teacher now has to worry about an active shooter coming into that classroom because we lose more than 30,000 of our fellow Americans each year to gun violence, including in our schools, because we have not found the political will to defy the NRA, the political action committees, the powers that be are concerned about the next election. After the massacre in Santa Fe, Texas, at Santa Fe High School, one of the most chilling moments was in the hours afterwards, a TV reporter puts a microphone in the face of one of the girls who survived that and asks her, were you shocked that somebody came in and started shooting your fellow students? And she said, no, I expected that would happen sooner or later. Why are our kids going through that? Why are we putting our educators through that? So yes, the state of New Hampshire and the state of Texas and the Commonwealth of Virginia and the other states of this union should spend more on public schools. I know that here in New Hampshire, they've diminished the amount of money they've invested, putting more pressure on the local property taxpayer, the local school district, the local government, which by the way are capped in the tax rate that they can set. We need some federal intervention and resources because education should be a civil right. It's a public benefit. It's in the public interest, and the public should spend the money, commensurate with the value that we receive from it. But stop not there, but include pre-K universally for every child because we know that it improves their ability to graduate from high school, earn more in their lives, pursue higher education. Acknowledge that at 4 or 5 years old, if you're a child of color in a kindergarten classroom, you're 5 times as likely to be disciplined or suspended or expelled. A schoolhouse to jailhouse pipeline that begins in kindergarten instead of high school. This is going to require investment, but it's also going to force us to face the facts and ensure that we hire more teachers who look like the students in front of them. And then when I learned from listening to you, that those who graduate from college in New Hampshire have the highest level of indebtedness in the country, and that higher education is so out of reach for so many that I think you lose more young people than almost any other state to higher education institutions in other states. So if you think about all that you have sunk into those kids, in their public school education, their quality of life, the libraries and bookstores, the streetlights and the parks, and all that investment is going to Massachusetts or Texas or Illinois or London. And it's not staying here. This also happens to be the second oldest state, I believe, in the union. It's having a very hard time attracting talent back to New Hampshire. So how do we meet that challenge? We make community college free for everyone who wants to attend. We ensure that if you want to go to a 4-year, public-facing, publicly funded 4-year university, that you're able to do that debt-free. And if you're one of those who has part of the $1.5 trillion in outstanding student loan debt in this country, which is more than all the credit card debt in this country combined, and auto debt in this country combined, with a default rate of 10%, literally crushing the people who have that on their backs right now, then if you're willing to dedicate some part of your life to public service, teaching in that classroom, serving one of those veterans in a VA that is 45,000 clinical positions short today. If you're going to dedicate yourself to this country should wipe clean your student loan debt. At a minimum, refinance the outstanding balance. Make sure that you can get on with your life. That to me is federal leadership on the issues of education. Thanks for asking.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No, you know it's on us. Can we turn the volume down on that second mic?
Yeah. I'll hold it down here.
Okay. Beto, bienvenido a New Hampshire. Es un placer tenerte aquí.
Let's just pull it down, come.
Yeah, just tell them. Don't worry, the rest of this is going to be in English.
Okay.
There are many of us Latinos who don't really, aside from your profile with Jorge Ramos, who don't really know you outside of Texas. And I think you'll find that New England itself is changing. You're talking about communities, attracting young people.
Mm.
I moved here from San Diego. And I've seen that little by little, the community is changing. The Latino community is growing, and we're trying really hard to be a part of that wonderful spirit that Granite Staters are. Like this do-it-yourself, figure out a way and just make it happen. How do you identify yourself? ¿Cómo tú sobresaltas among all the other candidates, specifically when it comes to addressing the Latino community?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. Voy a empezar en español y luego voy a continuar en inglés. Soy de una comunidad binacional. Ciudad Juárez y El Paso, juntos 3 millones de los dos países que hablan dos lenguas, pero forman un pueblo, una población. Y en El Paso, Texas, tenemos la comunidad más segura, una de las comunidades más seguras de los Estados Unidos. La seguridad depende de los inmigrantes, de los que buscan asilo y que tratamos gente con respeto y dignidad como merecen, como humanos, como americanos. Tenemos casi 80% de la población desde México, sus orígenes, su país de origen. Y yo pienso que puedo compartir una historia tan positiva de los migrantes, de la frontera, de las conexiones con México, con este país. Es la historia de este país, un país de migrantes, de irlandesa en el caso de los O'Rourkes from the 19th century, wherever we came from. Some can trace our roots back to this country 10,000 years, right? Gracias a usted, señor. 10,000 years, cross the Bering Strait, and for the following 10,000 years, our families have been here. Some kidnapped in West Africa, brought here in the Middle Passage, built the wealth of this country, literally in bondage as slaves. Others fleeing persecution, crushing poverty, violence, famine in the case of Ireland in the 19th century for the O'Rourkes, or in Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador today, some of, if not the most violent places on the planet, and those who have chosen us. And a quarter of El Paso was born in another country. Their very presence and their choice makes us more successful, makes us stronger, and here's the case I'm going to make to you, makes us safer, makes this country more secure. You do not need to purchase that security at the cost of $30 billion, 30 feet high, 2,000 miles long. You don't need to put kids in cages or militarize our communities. If we treat people with the respect and dignity that they merit as human beings, as Americans, that's the way I think that El Paso can show, or a candidate from El Paso can show, that we can make this country right again. In addition, además, I ran for Senate in what was thought to be such a reliably red state that we didn't have a snowball's chance. But showing up everywhere, in every community, in los ambos lenguas, ¿sí? Y puedo escuchar en español, pero también en inglés, listening to everyone in every community, not writing anybody off, not taking anyone for granted. You could be in the bluest of blue places, and we were going to show up in the Rio Grande Valley, or in El Paso, or in Austin. You could live in Archer City, and since we're in a bookstore, that's where Larry McMurtry wrote Lonesome Dove in the Last Picture Show. When I showed up there and went into Mern's Cafe to hold a town hall meeting just like this one, a guy stopped me before I could walk in the door, pulled out a black and white photo of his dad talking to LBJ at the American Legion Hall in 1948 when that congressman was running for Senate in our state. And he said, you know what, Beto, my dad and now I have lived here our entire lives, and you were the first candidate from either party running for the Senate to show up in Archer City in 70 years. We show up for everyone. Write nobody off. Take no one for granted, incluyendo los Latinos aquí en New Hampshire, en cada parte del país. Gracias. Thank you for being there. Very much.
To your left, and I'm going to have time for 2 more questions.
Beto, the current occupant of local office is making a mess of America's judiciary, in my view. I'm interested in your strategy for appointing judges. I would note that there are some amazing judges here in New Hampshire.
Let's hear it for judges. So, this president in Texas to a federal bench nominated a guy named Jeff Mateer, who espouses conversion therapy and literally said that transgender children are part of Satan's plan. That guy has no business passing judgment on anyone in any courtroom and any corner of the planet, much less in the United States of America. It may explain why Texas almost passed a transgender bathroom bill that sought to scare people about transgender kids coming into other kids' bathrooms, though transgender children are far more likely to be the victims and the perpetrators of these attacks. A president who doesn't respect the 1973 decision that ensured that women could make their own decisions about their own bodies, Roe versus Wade, or who's going to compound the problems from the 2010 Citizens United decision that conflated corporations with people and money with speech, and says that corporations can spend unlimited amounts to affect or purchase the outcomes of our elections or our legislation. States that still deny people functionally the right to vote based on their race. In Texas, we ranked 50th in voter turnout in the country. Not because we love our democracy less than you do in New Hampshire, but we were drawn that way. Based on your race or ethnicity, you would be drawn out of a congressional district to limit the impact of your vote. We have voter ID laws that say you can use your license to carry a firearm to prove who you are at the ballot box, but you cannot use your student ID at Texas Southern University to prove who you are at the ballot box. So a president, the next president, needs to nominate judges, including those to the highest court in the land, who believe in a woman's right to choose, believe in the fundamental civil rights of every American, believe in people over corporations, and believe in voting rights, so that the single greatest mechanism that mankind, humankind, has ever invented to call forth the power of people, democracy, is fully working given the challenges that we have now. So those are some of the litmus tests that we would impose. Thank you, Donald.
Okay, we're on the same area. This is going to be our last question.
Hi, Beto. My name is Amy McCall. I'm the state organizer in the Fight for Her campaign. We're working to end the global gag rule and protect access internationally to safe abortion care. Given that you've been a champion of reproductive rights and co-sponsored the Global Her Act, thank you, by the way.
Yeah.
Would you commit to ending the Helms Amendment if elected president?
Yes.
That was easy. Thank you.
Yeah, no. I'll just tell you, we saw what happened in Texas when we restricted this right. Closed down more than a quarter of family planning clinics. And in a state as large as ours, it's an 8-hour drive from my hometown of El Paso to our state capital, and you haven't made it halfway through the state at that point. The only Planned Parenthood clinic that we had shut down years before. Folks were forced to go out of state or just to not get any care at all in a state that had not expanded Medicaid either. So we say it's not just, although this is important, a legal right to an abortion. It's a cervical cancer screening. It's family planning, health. It's just seeing a provider of any kind. And so it shouldn't surprise us that Texas sits at the epicenter of that maternal mortality crisis that is so deadly for women and 3 times as deadly for women of color. This is a life or death matter for the women of this country, for the women in other countries of the world. So yes, you have my support and my gratitude for the work that you're doing and your advocacy. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Grateful. That's it. Thank you all for having us out here today. Gibson, thank you for hosting. And thank you, Senator Feltus, thank you. We are very, very grateful to all of you. Gracias. Les agradezco.